Welcome back to Beyond the Uniform. I'm Justin Asiri. My goal is to help members of the military and their families succeed in their post-military career. Normally, I do that by talking to military veterans and learning about what they do in their civilian career, how they got there, advice for other veterans seeking to do the same. We do that on new episodes every single Monday and Thursday. We have nearly 300 of them for free, on demand. Listen to them anytime, anywhere at beyondtheuniform.org. If you are a returning listener, welcome back. Appreciate your support. And you know that these Saturday episodes that we call Behind Beyond the Uniform are meant as an informal conversation, one-way conversation, unfortunately, but an informal conversation about, first of all, what's going on professionally, and then second of all, just kind of personal thoughts. It's the mullet format that I call it, business up front, party in the back, and feel free to stick around for as much of this as helps you. This is a very free-form episode. I'm a little bit pressed for time. It's Friday, down to the wire to get this out, and so I've jotted down a couple notes, and it's going to be very off the cuff, but nonetheless, I think it'll be very impactful. So the format for today is we're going to have quite a bit of business up front because I just literally minutes ago just got off the interview with Laura Renner, an Air Force veteran who started a company called Freedom Makers. The episode will not air until August 12th. But we're going to delve into, I took a ton of notes, and we're just going to walk through some of the things that stood out to me because we went every last minute in an interview that I wanted to be just 30 minutes because I have so much to do today. And we took the full time, if that tells you anything about the quality of the conversation. And then for the party in the back, I've got, let me just see if I've got this up here. I've got quite a few things on the personal front. Let me just see. It's a different set of notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe four personal notes to stick around for if you've enjoyed those in the past. So let's start with my conversation with Laura. So I thought she's her and I are cut from the same cloth, so there's a little bit of self-serving self-love here because everything she was saying connected so much with me. We have a very similar personality, but a little bit of background on her. Air Force Academy grad, went to business school, worked in a couple jobs, and then in working in the job, she found that it wasn't in alignment with who she was. Not a knock about the company, the job, anything. It's more the aspect of she had to really muster up some energy to go to work. She really had to give herself pep talks to go into the office. And so a lot of energy was being put to just being motivated rather than doing the work. And if you've listened to the show before, I talk about alignment a lot. That was definitely one of the themes of the interview. And what she found was she really enjoys freedom. That is one of her number one values. In doing some work, she realized that she wanted freedom in her time. She wanted freedom in her location. She wanted freedom in what she was doing. And so she started a company, serendipitously, she started a company called Freedom Makers because around the same time she was talking to her brother who's in the military, who was about to be stationed overseas, and she was talking to her sister-in-law about what is her sister-in-law going to do now living in Spain? What is her job? What is her occupation going to be? And she realized, hey, small businesses, she knew from her job, small businesses need help with a lot of tasks. Why not use the military spouse community to fill that need? Why not make a win-win situation where business owners get access to smart, motivated talent who can accomplish tasks for them at a cheaper rate than hiring someone full-time? And why not go to members of the military spouse community and say, look, I don't care if you're in Japan, I don't care if you're in Australia, work wherever you want. The job's portable, it can go with you, and you can take on clients and help out with different things and wear an entrepreneurial hat in helping them with their business. So you'll learn a lot more about Freedom Makers. It is beneficial to both military spouses, but also I think many of you, as we'll talk about here in a second, might be able to use this service to get things off your plate. So let me just kind of highlight some of the things that came up. First of all, we talked about volunteering as a way of exploring a career option. And it's something I haven't thought of in nearly 300 interviews, but you think of I think of volunteering, I think of Habitat for Humanity, I think of soup kitchens. All of those are wonderful things. But what about volunteering with a nonprofit to maybe help them with their finances? What about volunteering with a local company to shadow their CEO and learn what that's like? So I love this thought of using that volunteer energy to try something out. And she shares an example where she helped a nonprofit. She did a lot of finance work. And in that work, she realized she did not want to do finance. And how wonderful to determine that in a volunteering project of a couple weeks, a couple months, rather than devoting years down a path and then realizing, this is not really what I want to do. We talked a lot about in the interview something that I think is valuable for every listener, and that is core values. I just talked about and shared how freedom was a core value for her. I view that as well for myself. Autonomy is a core value for me. It's probably the number one value: autonomy, independence. And so, just a personal example, that means that I'm doing work right now where I can choose my clients, where I can do the work wherever I'd like, where I can work at the time that makes sense for me. And so while it still may take a lot of hours per week, I have a lot of autonomy in when that is done, in phase shifting it and working around a schedule that works for myself and for my family. And that works for me. It probably would drive many listeners crazy, but it doesn't matter because it's my values and I can choose jobs that work in alignment to that. And Laura in the interview shares her own version of that. But what I like about this as you uncover, and I always picture a paleontologist, I think it's a paleontologist, a dinosaur doctor, that'll be my term for it, scratching away with those little brushes and uncovering the bones. That's what it seems like to me, like really doing the work to uncover these values that drive us. But if you do that work, whether with a coach or on your own, if you do the work of uncovering those values, things become, at least in my experience, a lot simpler. It's simpler for me to say yes to opportunities. It's simpler for me to say no to opportunities. And specifically, I had a business school classmate recently reach out about an opportunity. It's a great opportunity to help run a company. It's a great company. There's so much that would be appealing to most people on the planet, I imagine. But for me, what might have been a difficult decision was very easy to just right off the bat say, you know what? Nope, that does not give me the autonomy that I crave at this point in my life. It may be financially successful. It may be perceived as very successful. But for me, I know that 9 to 5 in a specific location is not what's right for me, and therefore it's easier for me to say no. And it frees up so much more energy for me to focus on things that are yeses in my life. So I wanted to talk about core values. And then another thing that we talked about, and this is where Laura and I are cut from the same cloth. Maybe listeners might not identify with this as much, but I would kind of classify it as a little bit of ADD specifically around businesses. I get ideas all the time for starting businesses and for new features and all these things, and usually they fizzle out. Usually within a couple weeks, I'm like, ugh, that was a stupid idea. And so she talked about similar aspects to that, but how she uses phased plans to level out these highs and lows and this roller coaster. So I view it as kind of buckets where she's working on her current bucket. Who knows how long that's going to take, but as a company, that's where they're focused. They're very explicit about what they're working on, what they're building, where they're putting their attention. And then they've got other buckets further out where they know, okay, we're on phase 1 right now, but phase 7, we're going to be doing X, Y, or Z. And then as she has ideas, she just adds those to the buckets of, oh yeah, this is a great thing to consider when we get there. And so what I love about this phased approach is that by the time she gets to one of those buckets, it's had time to marinate. Some of those ideas are probably stale and don't make sense. Some of them have maybe come together with others to be something even better, but it gives time for this to level out without immediately diving into it. She talked about talking to 3 people to test an idea, which I love, whether that's a career change, whether that's a new feature to build, whether that's an idea about starting a company, whatever it is. Getting 3 external people, even as a tool of just having to articulate to someone else, getting outside of your head, having to articulate, this is what I'm thinking and this is why, and getting their feedback on the idea. And then she also talked about waiting a few weeks, and all 3 of these are great tactics if, like me, you kind of go on these roller coasters or maybe get excited about shiny objects and want to chase after them. It's a way of just baking in a little bit more structure. I'm thinking of Jocko Willink's book, Discipline Equals Freedom. And this is definitely an example where adding a little bit of discipline here ultimately will lead to more freedom because you're not chasing your tail as much. And then another aspect we talked about is delegation. And I use a virtual assistant for Beyond the Uniform and for Storybox. And we talked about this where you may be on active duty, you may be in a job as an executive, you may be, there's no limit to the listeners and what they're doing in their lives right now for Beyond the Uniform. But we just talked about delegating and getting things off your plate. And it might not be about time as much as energy. And the example that I'll share is with Storybox. We invoice our clients. And anytime you invoice clients, there's some that delay in payment and some invoices that just kind of sit there. And so you have to nag people about invoices. And I hate doing this. It's something that I just continuously, one week to the next, noticed. I continuously kicked that can down the street. I just did not want to do that. And so I took a little bit of time and wrote down the process and added access to QuickBooks and all the software that we use and gave it to my virtual assistant. And she does that now. Doesn't take a ton of time. It takes a tremendous amount of weight off my shoulders, just mentally and emotionally, and not having to do something I dislike. Or the show notes for Beyond the Uniform. They take 10 minutes to do, and I hate doing them. So I wrote a process for my virtual assistant to do that. And so I would encourage listeners, obviously I like Laura, I have no financial incentive to promote Freedom Makers other than just it's a great company and a great cause. And happy to share other virtual assistant platforms too. There's a lot of them out there. But the thing I would encourage listeners for, regardless of what you're doing right now, there's probably a fair amount that you could get off your plate that would make you a lot happier. And that might be finding reservations and making them for your next dinner with your partner. That might be researching price comparisons for something you're about to buy. That might be researching cool things to do on your next vacation. Anything that doesn't energize you, anything that you're not looking forward to, we're living in an age now where someone might be really excited to do that for you and make money to live their own life of freedom. And so I think it's interesting to think of, think like an executive on this. Maybe dabble in this. Dabble with having an assistant or being able to delegate things that you might be a little uncomfortable to do, but might better serve you and your family to get off your plate. And that's definitely been true in my life. And then last thing I'll share on the professional front with Laura is she talked about building a company or building a career the way you want to live. And that was my biggest my biggest takeaway from Laura, and something I really admire. And I think that every single listener could benefit from this advice. And I was taking notes, honestly, for myself, because I know I could benefit from this, is this thought of really building your life in alignment with who you are. And, if you've listened to these other episodes, you realize, like, for me, that is building a life where I can be able to shift when I work and where I work and things like that. And that's living in alignment for me For some of you, that might be finding a job. Maybe you like to get up early, so you want to find a job that you can start at 4 a.m. and be done by 3 p.m. and then spend time with your kids. Maybe some of you, you want to get after it right now. You want to learn and grow as much as possible. You want to see the world. So maybe that's finding a job where you can travel and where you can work a ton and learn a ton and make a lot of money. Whatever it is, there's no judgment here. The advice I would give to you, the unsolicited advice, maybe it's solicited because you're listening to the podcast, but the unsolicited advice I'd give you is do the heavy work and bring the honesty to the conversation to understand what makes you tick and what energizes you. And one last example I'll share here, and you've heard this if you've listened to the show for a while now, but for years, for decades, I told myself, I like managing people. I'm from the military. I'm good at it. This is what I do. I like doing it. I started my own company. I went to business school. I did all these things, telling investors, telling myself, telling my team, telling anyone who would listen that that's a core part of who I am. And it wasn't until, nearly a decade later that my wife pointed out, like, man, you are really, anytime you're doing anything that actually is managing people, you are really depleted. You really do not enjoy that. You really do not get your energy from that. And it took a lot of honesty for me to admit that and to say, this is a core part of my identity and it's not actually who I am. And that allowed me, when I had that honesty, to start building my company and my life in a way that supported who I am. And Laura does a great job. She's very articulate around explaining this, but for her, I love she made this distinction. It's like, look, me running a company, it's not easy. There's a million things to do. It's hard work, but at least I don't have the additional hard work of not being in alignment with what energizes me. At least I love what I do. That doesn't make it easier, but at least it doesn't make it harder because I'm fighting my nature. I'm doing something that's not aligned with who I am and what I'm put on this earth to do. And the last thing I'll say with that is that changes over time. I'm fully accepting that 2 years from now, 3 years from now, hey, maybe even 6 months from now, the way that I'm living right now may not work. Maybe I will want structure, I'll want connection, I'll want stability, and all of these things will lead me to a job diametrically opposed to the one that I'm currently doing right now. But that's something we talk about in this interview, is the importance of the moment by moment checking in. Not just saying, hey, I'm good, I figured this out, and I'm good for life, but it is moment by moment what's right for the company, moment by moment what's right for me, moment by moment what's right for my family, and not just chalking this up as the way it will always be. So that will be, again, my conversation with Laura Renner. It's episode 297, August 12th, but wanted to share those notes with you. And then let's move to the party in the back. So a couple just personal items, if you want to stick around for these. The first one is I talk a lot about podcasts and audiobooks. I pitch Audible all the time, and I will pitch it again. If you go to our show notes, you will find a promotion where Audible will give you a free book of your choice because you're a Beyond the Informed listener. Check that out. But I didn't look at this before. I have over 90 books on Audible. I've been listening to them for a long time. So over 90 books on Audible. And let me just open up. I use an app called Stitcher to listen to podcasts. And when I open it up, it always tells me, sorry to waste your time here. There we go. 602 hours, Stitcher is telling me. I've listened to 602 hours of podcasts. So no shortage of using what I call net time, no extra time, to learn, to grow, to be entertained. And I wanted to just share a counterbalance to that advice I'm always giving, which is the equal importance of not listening to something. And I get reminded of this over the years repeatedly. I have to it's like rediscovering this principle. But I try to introduce a discipline of not listening to things too. So right now, when I'm driving around, I'm not listening to music, I'm not listening to an audiobook, I'm not listening to a podcast, I'm just driving. And it's great. I try that with running as well. I always listen to something when I'm running, and there's times now when I'm just going for a run without doing that. A lot of times when I'm feeding my son Bodhi, I'll be listening to something as well. Gotta make that time count. And there's equal importance for me to just be there with him and not be listening to anything. And so I just wanted to make sure I shared that in case that's helpful for you listeners. And I say that at the expense of you listening to Beyond the Uniform right now. But I just find that there is a value of inserting these pauses for a week or for a few days or maybe just for a drive, of just being present with your thoughts, your experience, having time to just stew on things, letting your brain process things. I think that's important creatively. I think that's important for happiness, to have some time to just breathe, let things air out, and not feel like you have to fill every second with efficiency, because it is just as efficient and just as important to just enjoy whatever you're doing without constantly being distracted. And of course, I'm not saying not to do that. I fully plan on listening to my audiobook when I'm driving around today, but I also fully intend to make sure I'm blocking off times when I'm not doing that. The next thing I wanted to share, and this came out of I do a men's group every other Thursday. Last night we had a group, just a really incredible experience for me, and it's been over a year now that I've been doing this. But one of the things that came up that I wanted to share was about problem solving versus just expressing concern. And the context was one of the guys in the group was sharing with us about a challenge he's facing at work, a dilemma, and just really stressed out about it. And as you can imagine, being a group of guys where we are biased, I think, to problem solving, when he shared this, we all started to give advice. We all started to problem solve for him. And the facilitator of the group stopped one of the guys and just asked him, like, hey, what does it feel like right now? Like, what are you feeling? And he stopped giving advice. And he's like, man, I don't like that this guy feels uncomfortable right now. I want to help him out of this. I don't like that he's feeling stressed. I feel stressed about that. And when he said that, we all of us, I'll just speak for myself, but like I think everyone did, like I felt, it felt touching to see his concern for another member of the group, to see that love, to see that friendship, that camaraderie of like, man, this dude, he doesn't want him to suffer. He wants him to feel good. And one of the takeaways from that was how much more that meant to the person receiving the advice than the actual advice. He shared like it meant so much more just to know that this other human being cared about him, that this other human being didn't want him to be suffering. And in honesty, the advice wasn't really helping him. And, I can relate to this in marriage. Like there's times when my wife, Rebecca, I'll share something going on where it's just a shitty situation. And she'll get into problem solving mode. And, I'll have to stop and say, look, I'm not looking for advice. I'm just looking for you to feel with me like, man, this sucks. All I need you to say is like, that sucks. That sounds really difficult. And you've got this. I'm wanting acknowledgement and I'm wanting assurance. And I wanted to share that first, this distinction between problem solving and expressing concern. Particularly for men, I think we struggle with this a little bit more, just to try experimenting that with a friend, with your partner, with someone. And I'll give you a second piece of advice that someone shared. I never heard this before. One of the guys in the group shared, he used to work at Apple. And I may butcher this, but it was the 3 A's. He said that they went through training where they learned and role-played. They practiced this repeatedly, the 3 A's, which I think he had said was acknowledge, align, and assure. And so he shared an example. Someone comes in, they're stressed out, they're pissed, they're fuming because their phone doesn't work. They can't get their email, they can't reach their calls, they can't even get directions to the Apple store, and they are just letting him have it. And so he took the first A and he acknowledged it like, oh man, that sounds awful. It sounds like it's really frustrating not having your phone, not having this work, not being able to get around. That sounds like it sucks. And then they move on to alignment. And man, if I was in the same situation, I would be frustrated, I'd be angry, I'd be stressed out, I'd be regretting my purchase. I would just really be fuming right now if I were you. He's aligning with them. He's letting them know that he knows that, what they're feeling is perfectly normal. And then the last piece is assurance. And you know what? We're going to work together and we're going to figure this out, and you're not leaving this store until this phone's working again. Assuring them that it's going to be okay. And I think that's a great model. I haven't obviously had this enough time to use it, but I love that thought, acknowledging, aligning, assuring. And I sitting next to this guy, my phone works perfectly, and I was like, man, I was relaxed. Like hearing him say that in this hypothetical situation, I'm like, oh man, I feel so relaxed. I feel like I'm going to be taken care of. And I think that kind of does relax one's nervous system, and then maybe you problem solve. But he pointed out that at Apple in this training that they said no one's gonna to let you solve their problem or help them solve their problem until they feel understood. And I think that is pretty true and pretty universal. So I wanted to share that. And then another thing that came up in the men's group, and I know that I've been talking a lot in these Saturday episodes about discomfort. I think the last 3 or 4 episodes, there's been some flavor of talking about discomfort. And one of the guys in the group, actually the guy who facilitates the group, shared, he's like, I'm starting to question. Especially, I think we notice this most pronounced with our spouses. But he said, I'm starting to notice with my wife when she expresses some sort of frustration or discomfort, or she's stressed or sad or angry. He's like, I'm starting to realize that my problem solving, it's because I can't handle the discomfort of whatever she's feeling. She's pissed about something. I really can't handle that, and to escape that discomfort, I need to problem solve. I need to get her out of there because I just don't feel comfortable feeling that, sitting there with her with those feelings. And I think that's true for me too, especially, for my wife, when, the person I care about most in this world, when I see her suffering, when I see her angry or disconnected or frustrated or, whatever it is, it really triggers something in me, and I get into problem-solving mode. And I think I viewed that in the past as an act of generosity, but I think based on what he's sharing, I'm rethinking that, and I'm realizing, like, man, it is actually pretty selfish. She's feeling something, and I can't handle that, and so I have to, do something. And I think it can be, this is maybe not universally true, but I think it can be an act of courage to be able to sit with that discomfort and just kind of stew in it with her for a little bit. Maybe take those 3 A's, or maybe a couple of them, but man, that sounds awful. It sounds like you had a really rough client call, and it sounds like they were not treating you with respect or dignity, and it sounds like, it was not an enjoyable experience, and that sounds like it sucks. And I would feel really frustrated and lonely, and I'd feel really angry if that happened to me. And maybe just stop there. And the few times that I've actually been able to do this, it is really amazing to see often that just that can be enough to help someone shift or to help someone figure out their own solution. I don't know what they should be doing, right? I can barely focus on my own life, let alone fixing their life. And so I would just throw that out as an option of trying that, of noticing if it's difficult for you to tolerate that discomfort of someone you care about being in a difficult situation. And at least before offering advice or a solution or problem solving or collaboration, give it a little bit of room just to acknowledge what they're feeling. And have that be enough, and see if that shifts things more. Maybe not, maybe it does, but let me know if you try that and that works. And then last thing, and this is just, I don't talk a lot about relationships on the show, but I've found that when my relationship with my wife is off, everything is affected. I am less effective at work. I'm less effective in life. I'm just less effective in the world. And so, it's an area where I want to figure out, like, how do I live with the best relationship possible, because it affects everything, right? It's just common sense. But one of the things that I wanted to share is this concept. This came up partly last night as well in the men's group, but this thought about, I view it in military terms, on submarine terms, as preventative maintenance. And on submarines, we were so always on the clock, around the clock, doing preventative maintenance. We're cleaning filters, we're swapping out parts, we're adding oil and lubricant. We're just constantly doing work to prevent a catastrophe down the road. And that's the way that I view relationships. And I was fortunate that early on in my relationship with Rebecca, when we were just dating for months, we started going to various workshops and trainings around our relationship. And I don't really have one in particular to recommend to listeners, other than I would wager that no matter where you are, if there is some sort of couples training or couples workshop or whatever, I don't really care what the premise is, I'm betting if you go to it, you will be better off. And, what was powerful for me is, we're months into our relationship and we're in this workshop, and there's people there who have been married for 20 years and they're sorting through problems. And it just made me think of these knots that have sat and tightened for decades, and how excruciatingly difficult it is to untie those knots. And, how much work it takes, right? And so it made me think, like, man, I don't want to be in that spot. I want to be proactive. And already just months into our relationship, we got stuff to sort out. So let's get preventative. Let's start to address these problems when they're maybe pebble size or stone size, rather than gigantic boulders of problems that really take some dynamite to get through. And what one of the guys said that stuck with me is, he's like, my wife and I went to this workshop, and he's like, I feel like I got some power tools now. He's like, any job you want to do, it's going to be easier if you have the right tools. And I got some power tools in our relationship. I've got a couple tips on, when we are having an argument, that we got to fight fair. Because if we fight dirty, then it's going to take a ton longer to repair this, and it's going to take weeks rather than maybe hours, and that sucks for everyone. And so I've got some power tools. I've learned some things to try and pull out and apply to our relationship. And I love that analogy of power tools and preventative maintenance. And it's a little bit over the net in terms of me giving this advice to all of you listeners. But if you've stayed to the end, you're obviously at least somewhat interested, or maybe you've dozed off. But just advice on, I don't think there's a lot of great role models in our world around exceptional relationships. And I don't think that there's a lot of airtime given to it. I think that there's no shortage of business and financial success advice and role models and things like that. But I'm always peeking behind the curtain to see, like, okay, what's their relationship to their partner and to their kids and their family? How does that look like? I don't really care about what their business advice is if I see that they are on their 8th marriage and they don't even have a relationship with their kids. And so I wanted to give a little bit of airtime just to talk about, encouraging you and destigmatizing, because I think a lot of my friends don't go to do this couples workshop because it's like, well, we're not on the fringe of divorce, or whatever the reason is. You don't have to be. It's preventative, right? You can have an exceptional relationship. I would challenge you to go deeper. Or, if you're having a great time in your relationship, that, for me and my wife, that's when we want to double down. When we're madly in love and we're not a problem in the world, yes, it's great to go to the beach, but use some of that time to, like, get ready for the next level of the video game that's going to be tougher. Get ready to shore up for the hurricane that's going to come, right? Anyone who's married knows this. Like, there's always going to be challenges. And so, like, get ready for that. Start building in some structure so when the next tidal wave comes, when you go through some sort of crisis that maybe puts strain on your relationship, you're ready. You've been doing the workout. You've been doing the reps. You've been building the muscles together as a couple so you can fare through that storm. So that is it for Behind the Beyond Uniform, July 13th, 2019. We've got great episodes coming out. Let me just look at our schedule here. Oh, man. On Monday, Maggie Neal from Stanford is sharing how to negotiate. And then Thursday, Preston Pish is sharing his podcast, We Study Billionaires, and what he has learned while on active duty from producing one of the most successful podcasts out there. Both of those are exceptional interviews. So stay tuned for those. Thank you for listening. Keep the feedback coming and have a wonderful weekend.